Recently, the LTA launched the Bus Connectivity Enhancement Program, abbreviated as the BCEP, which aims to, you guessed it, improve the connectivity provided by buses in Singapore. The first service introduced under this scheme was Bus Service 861, which I had the privilege of riding a few days ago. Bus 861 falls into the category of routes that can be described as long feeders. It connects the estates of Canberra and Yishun to the MRT stations of Sembawang, Canberra and Khatib. It is thus yet another manifestation of the LTA's ideology of hub and spoke, where the primary role of bus services, at least the newer ones, is to connect to higher order transport, principally the MRT network. But what is hub and spoke even? A hub and spoke network connects various locations to a single intermediary known as a hub. For instance, let's look at the town of Yishun in northern Singapore, whose transport network was planned along the lines of hub and spoke. The main transport hub in the town is the MRT station, which is integrated with a bus interchange and a mall. Spokes in the form of feeder bus routes radiate from the hub, functioning as lower order transit, connecting the nooks and crannies of the town. While trunk buses do serve Yishun, heading to destinations such as Little India and Bukit Timah, they are almost all concentrated along Yishun Avenue 2, leaving most Yishunites to solely be served by these feeders. In short, in the case of Singapore, hub and spoke involves buses as a first mile last mile connection, while the MRT is used for the majority of the journey. Well, there are exceptions to this, but for the sake of my sanity and this video's length, I won't go into them. So if the introduction of 861 is anything to go by, it seems that LTA has gone all in on planning our transport network around a hub and spoke ideology. New towns such as Tengah have their entire transport network solely built around hub and spoke, buses only connecting residents to the nearest MRT. With Singapore's transport being rated some of the best in the world, it seems that this is working, right? Well, no. I've identified 3 key problems with the hub and spoke model and how they end up making our public transport even worse. Firstly, and rather counterintuitively, a hub and spoke system is shockingly inefficient. Hub and spoke systems pride themselves on their supposed efficiency. In theory, hub and spoke systems enable more destinations to be served with fewer resources, shifting passengers to higher order transport which has higher capacity. However, this necessitates a very high frequency of feeder services to these MRT stations, since for commuters to get anywhere, they need their feeder service to the nearest MRT to arrive as often as possible. This means that a ludicrous amount of resources have to be poured into the operation of feeder services, which actually borders on wastage. The worst examples of this are Service 807, which operates with a ludicrous 24 buses in its fleet, and Service 811, of which I caught 4 bunches within 5 minutes, including 2 triple bunches. The worst part is that these services actually run empty during off-peak hours, causing them to siphon away buses from the services that actually need them. As per the words of Chee Hong Tat himself, each feeder service only carries an average of 35 passengers per bus, a frankly pathetic number compared to trunks which carry way more. This shows that relying on hub and spoke, and thus committing to a high frequency of feeders, paradoxically makes your network less efficient. Second of all, hub and spoke hampers network resilience by creating numerous single points of failure. By shifting long distance passengers to higher order transit, commuters basically have to hope and pray that this higher order transit, which in Singapore's case is the MRT, is always reliable and rarely breaks down. Always reliable and rarely breaks down. As every Singaporean can tell you, a world where the MRT never breaks down may as well be a pipe dream. We actually saw this unfold with the recent East-West line disruption. The west side of Singapore almost solely relies on the EWL to travel literally anywhere. When it blew up, hundreds of thousands of people were stranded, with the lucky ones managing to crowd onto the meager provision of city direct services, while most had to cram onto the bridging buses and the few parallel trunk service, which winded and were significantly longer. The emphasis on hub and spoke in the west side of Singapore only exacerbated this catastrophe, there were few viable alternatives to the East-West line out west. Worse still, the LTA actually has no plans to build an MRT line parallel to the East-West line in the west, and as such, if the EWR goes kaput again, expect the west side to suffer, and the hub and spoke system is once again to blame. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the user end of the experience of hub and spoke is absolutely miserable. A hub and spoke network entails most journeys involving transfers, usually between lower and higher order transit. This involves lots of walking, and in a hot and humid, and more importantly rapidly aging Singapore, it is no surprise why many people detest walking. To address this, the LTA actually has built integrated transport hubs, which puts bus interchanges, malls, and MRT stations under one roof. In theory, these allow for seamless transfers between buses and the MRT network, mitigating the problem of having to walk long distances. However, the quote-unquote integration of these integrated transport hubs is often laughably bad. In the case of Yishun, it took me a solid 5 minutes and 54 seconds to walk from the alighting berth of the integrated transport hub to the fairgates of the MRT. With transfers this long and physically demanding, it is no surprise that Singaporeans do not prefer a hub and spoke system. Take the words of our former Transport Minister Raymond Lim himself. He stated in 2008 that Singaporeans want more direct buses, that we find transfers too painful, and we do not like the randomness and stress that is associated with having to transfer many times and potentially enduring long waiting times. With hub and spoke producing such an emotionally and physically demanding experience of taking public transport, it is no wonder why Singaporeans are increasingly ditching public transport in favour of cars, especially in newer hub and spoke oriented towns, which actually compromises the LTA's own goal of a car-light Singapore. So now, we've established that hub and spoke has failed to bring about great public transportation in Singapore. So then, what is the alternative? Thankfully, there are many great alternatives that exist. Before I proceed, however, I will preface by saying I'm not actually against hub and spoke. I do agree that it is wasteful to completely rely on a point-to-point system, and that hub and spoke is necessary in some cases, especially where demand patterns have not fully developed. However, I do disagree with it forming the basis of our transit system. So, okay, enough yapping, let's proceed to the solutions. First of all, we need to provide alternatives to hub and spoke and make these alternatives desirable. Alternatives can come in the form of bus services which connect various locations without requiring you to transfer between various modes of transit. For these alternative bus connections to be viable, they need to be direct, fast, and convenient. As such, rapid stopping buses and express buses are the best alternative to an MRT-based hub and spoke system. Going back to our case study of Yishun, bus routes can either be introduced through or amended to ply inner portions of the town, serving destinations such as Avenue 4, whose residents currently completely rely on feeders. But for these alternatives to truly flourish, they need to be attractive to commuters. Currently, expressway buses spend far too long stuck in congestion, especially during the peak hours when most people travel. This can be overcome through the implementation of bus lanes on expressways to speed up bus journeys and make them more time competitive. These actually dampen the ripple effects of any future catastrophic MRT breakdown, with alternatives being well established and readily usable, providing similar travel times to the MRT itself. Furthermore, if hub and spoke is really the only option, then let's try and make it as painless as possible. Good bus stop design is actually one of the more underrated aspects of a great transit system. Bus stops and interchanges should be more easily accessible from MRT stations, with transfer times taking no longer than 3 minutes even at a slower walking pace. Bus stops should be directly outside the MRT exits, even directly integrated with them. A shining example of this is a bus stop outside Marine Terrace Station's Exit 1, which allows for seamless transfers between the buses and the TEL. While integrated transport hubs are flashy and aesthetically gorgeous even, they come at the expense of functionality. Future interchanges, such as ones in Tengah, can be built smaller and closer to the MRT stations in order to allow for faster connections between different modes of transit. In sum, these changes will ensure a more robust and connected public transport network, able to withstand unforeseen shocks, bring about monetary savings, and make the commuter experience better for all. This is the Singapore we want to achieve after all. A transport network that is built and caters to the commuter using it and not for the maximization of the higher ups profits. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and I hope you all liked it. I actually have many more videos planned about Singapore's public transportation, its highs, lows, and how we can make it so much better. This is actually my first video on this subject and your support will mean the world to me. If you want to get in touch, you can join the Singapore Transport Critic Discord server and follow my Instagram page. Both links will be in the description. Till then, see ya!